Hey yo, Roche here. So today I wanted to create a tutorial. This is going to be our first tutorial as LRS, and I wanted to go over essentially creating a master material and material instances. So as you know, whenever you bring in a new asset into Unreal Engine, let's say something that I modeled in Blender, I would need to create a material for it. Now the problem is during runtime, essentially when the game is trying to load that asset you've brought in with this material, it can severely hinder the performance of your game during real time, just because reloading a new material in every single instance is tax heavy, as it's calculations that are being run, the same calculations over and over again. Now to combat this, Unreal Engine actually brought out a feature a long time ago called material instancing. Now, what is material instancing? I'm going to read from Unreal Engine's documents essentially what material instancing is, and then I'll kind of break down my definition of how I interpret it.
Material instancing is used to change the appearance of a material without incurring an expensive recompilation of the material, whereas a typical material cannot be changed without recompiling. A parameterized material can be edited in a material instance without such recompilation. This has numerous workflow advantages, and can improve material performance.
So how I'm interpreting that essentially is we have our main parent material, and it's got all these properties and values that can be modified. And then we've got a material instance that is kind of like think of it like in a tree format, a child of that parent material. So what essentially happens is you set certain parameters within this parent material class, and then you have your material instance that pulls those parameters and says, hey, here's a blank, let's say, texture location, just fill this in, and then I will go and put it into the code, so the code only has to run one time as opposed to consistently. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but that's the way I was able to understand it and break it down. Now, what I'm going to show you is essentially how we create a master material, and then how we can use that for all our static meshes in our game, and certain parameters that we can tweak the material there afterwards. All right, let's get going. All right, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is I just want to get you to some meshes that I'll be showing you. Oh, that's not what I want to show you. That is a preview for our work in progress level. Be sure to check out our devlogs if you want to see everything that happens with that. Anyways, enough of that self-promoting. Let's move on. Okay, so I essentially have two containers, A, B, and then two essentially palettes. Now the idea is this is going to be a red container and this is going to be a blue container. I'm also going to demonstrate the palettes to show you how versatile essentially setting up a master material can be. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our content browser, and as you can see here, I've already brought in the textures and our two meshes. All right, so essentially to create a master material, the first thing we have to do is we have to go just create a plain old material. And usually in coding terms for Unreal Engine, you would say MM at the start for master material as an indication, because it makes searching up essentially anything in relation to a master material much easier. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute. So we go MM for master material underscore, and then we would just say master material, just like that. Now, essentially what we could do is, if any time we are looking for that exact material, we would just type in the search bar mm underscore, and then master material should show up in the content browser. And there it is right there. So this is a good way just to organize your stuff and to be able to find what you need without spending a lot of time going through all your folders, because you're gonna eventually get to the point where it gets crazy like this. Okay, so we name it master material. Let's open that up. And the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to bring in our textures. Now, you don't have to do this. I'm just doing it because it's easier for me, but essentially I'll show you two ways. You can either just bring in your textures by selecting each one. So I'm selecting all the ones that have to do with the red container. You'll see red at the end of the name. That's how I identified it. You can bring them in, and then you can just, it will bring them, Unreal Engine will bring them in as texture samples. Another way you could do this is you just right click and type in texture sample, and there it is. Does the exact same thing. Now, one thing to note, I'm using Substance Painter for all my textures. So essentially what Substance Painter does is it packs all the metallic, roughness, and ambient occlusion into one map, whereas other software brings it out separately. So that's why you'll see I only have 3. Essentially, this method that I'm teaching you works the same for any other software you use. If it brings in the roughness, the metallic, and the ambient occlusion maps separately, this will still work just fine. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, I am using Substance Painter's texture packing method. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to convert each one of these into a parameter. We're going to name this one face color. This is our normal map, so we're gonna name this just normal. And then, because this is essentially a packed map, I came up with an acronym that works for me. AO for ambient occlusion, R for roughness, M for metallic. You can do whatever else you want to do, that just makes the most sense for me. Now, one thing to note, when a packed map is formed, essentially the ambient occlusion runs on the red color node, the roughness runs on the green color node, and then the metallic on the blue color node. Right, so we could essentially just plug these into each one of its nodes. And we'd be done. Essentially, you can see right there, it comes in. And this is the method of just creating essentially a material for the purposes of putting into the game world and then loading that material onto your asset, which we could totally do. But like we explained before, this severely hinders the performance of the game, and that's why we can't really use that method, and that's why we have to move to more of material instance method. I'm gonna remove all of these. You can hold in Alt and left click on each line whenever you want to remove a line. And we're gonna start off by adding 4 new nodes. The first node we're gonna add is a texture coordinate node. Next, we're going to add a multiply. And then we're going to add 2 constants. Now, there's 2 ways you can go about this. I'll just show you. The first way is just typing in constant. That works too. Or you can hold in number 1 on your keypad and then left click, and then that creates it. Just for the sake of simplifying things, I'm just going to be holding in number 1 and clicking each time just because it's faster for me. Next thing you're going to do, and we're going to be doing this a lot, you're going to convert these into a parameter, and you're going to name this U. Oops, not that. And we're going to name this V. Now, why am I doing this? Well, I don't know if anyone's really aware. I was not aware of this until a few months ago, but the coordinate system of X and Y, essentially your 2D coordinate system of what is up and what is down and what is right and left on a texture plane, essentially is actually called U and V, not X and Y. Don't ask me why, this is just how it is. You could call this X and this Y if you really wanted to, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm gonna stick with what's known as industry standard for Unreal Engine, and we're just gonna call it U and V. Now, what we're gonna try and do is give whoever's essentially controlling this the option to scale the textures on a U and V on an X or Y scale. Now, to do that, we're gonna add an append here. Connect the U to the A, the V to the B. Then we're going to connect the texture coordinate, which is essentially just telling the Unreal Engine essentially that, hey, look for the texture's location in terms of numerical data on the asset. That's basically what texture coordinate does, from my understanding. Then connect append to multiply B. And essentially we could stop here and we could connect each one of these pieces. But I want to go a step further. Essentially what I want to do now is I also want to create a method that the player can scale the texture also on a UV scale. So U and V at the same time. Again, this just brings up more options if we're going into tiling certain textures for floor assets, for example. So to do that, we're going to bring in another constant. I'm going to convert that to a parameter. We're going to call this UV. By the way, for all of these, make sure the default value is always 1. And the reason why we do this is because texture coordinates are running always on a 1-to-1 scale. So essentially, if you make it 1, then when you bring in the texture, you're telling the program, hey, listen, multiply this texture by 1. What is 1 times 1? It's 1. So nothing will change then. But then if you want to multiply it by 2, you'll see when we modify the parameters, let's say this to 2, it will multiply the texture by 2, and that will scale it. Okay, so in order to do this, we created the UV parameter. Now we're going to add in another multiply. And with that, we're going to connect old multiply to new one and the UV to the B. Now we're good. Now we can essentially connect this guy onto each texture coordinate. Good, that's done. To simplify things or to actually organize things, we're just going to take this, comment on it, and call it text coordinates. I'm not sure if that's spelled correctly, but sue me. Now, again, we could honestly just go and connect these guys in here, this guy in there, there, and there, and honestly, we can call it a day. If we go now into our desolate world or into our map, you can right click on your master material and say, hey, I want to create a material instance. Now what Unreal Engine is going to do is it's going to create an instance of this material. Duh, it's in the name. So what we could do now is we can activate all of these new texture parameters that we've added in, right? Now, let's say I wanted to use the blue one instead. I could honestly just throw it in there. Everything that says blue. Save that. Throw on this material instance. And boom, it comes in, right? And if I wanted to duplicate this, I can go, let's call this one material instance underscore container red, and we'll just name this one blue. So now we'll open up the red, and now we'll just essentially replace everything that's blue with everything that's red. Next we just throw on the red on there, and boom. So now we're saying, hey, we have this master material, it's got the code in it. We just want to change certain parameters, and that's essentially what material instances allows us to do. And instead of loading this material every single time in a game scene, we're just essentially loading now the material instances, which is less performance heavy and affects our system on a much lower scale. And then, as you can see, bring this in, I could affect now the UV scales. Now, this won't essentially look good in any way whatsoever because these assets were not designed to be scaled fundamentally, but let's just say hypothetically they were. We can now change the scale however we want if it was, let's say, a floor asset. Could also now change it. Oof, that is very disturbing. This is not a very good example. Maybe I'll create another tutorial on floor assets. So what if we want to do a little bit more? We want to edit the roughness, we want to edit the metallic, the AO a little bit. Well, we can. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our master material, and we're going to start with the base color. So let's disconnect this. Bring the base color up, and we're going to now add 4 new nodes. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a vector. And we're going to name this shading. Add in a lerp node, or in this case it's actually called a linear interpolate, because if you type in lerp, you're not going to get what you need, trust me. Just type in linear interpolate, or you'll see it over there, linear interpolate. And it's called lerp for short. We're going to add into a multiply, and then another constant. And this constant we're gonna just turn into a parameter, and we're gonna name it intensity. Now, what are we trying to do? I'm pretty sure you can figure this out, but essentially we want to be able to change, let's say we want to change the shading, like just a hint, like do some tweaking on the overall coloring. We can essentially do this by allowing us to essentially modify this and by creating it into a parameter. Once we convert it into a parameter, all we're basically doing is we're saying, hey, here's the intensity, here's the color, and here's the base texture. Plug it in, and then boom, you can start modifying the shading just a little bit. Some people call this tinting, I just like to call it shading. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna first make this everything 1. Whoops. You're gonna connect this into your multiply node. Up, and you're going to connect your base color into your multiply as well. Then you're going to take your intensity, plug it into your alpha. You're going to take your base color, plug it into your bravo, and then you multiply into your alpha again. And that's it. Then you're just going to plug this back into the base color. We're going to take all of this, we're going to comment it, we're going to say shading. This guy down. I like to organize my stuff. You don't have to, but I would recommend it. Get into the practice of doing it. Comment on this. Textures. Now, if we save this, run back into the world, open this guy up, you'll see we have a new parameter here called shading and intensity. So let's check shading out. Essentially, if we wanted to make, and this is why I call it shading, unless this is a purely white object on a 1-to-1 scale, you're not going to be able to change its color out entirely. So we can only modify maybe the shading just a little bit. So let's say maybe I wanted it to be a bit more red than what I already have it. Or let's add in a tint of yellow, right? And then we can go over here and we can actually edit the intensity of that tint. Sure, we'll go with that. And we'll save that. All right, let's move on. So we want to do more. We're not just satisfied with that. Let's see what we can do with the normal. Now for the normal, I'm actually going to show you guys something called material function. And if you think of anything in lines of code, essentially this is you creating a function and later we're going to call that function into our master material. You don't have to do this. You can honestly just make this in the master material, but I'm doing this just to kind of show you guys how material functions work and how they can be applied into the rest of your blueprints. So we're going to take this, we're going to rename it to normal strength, never leave a space. We're going to go in here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add 4 nodes. We're going to add in a function input. And instead of typing that in again, you can just hold in Control D and it'll create a duplicate of that original node that you selected. We're gonna leave this as a vector 3 and we're gonna change this guy to a scalar. We're gonna rename this guy to base normal. And this one we're gonna name as normal strength. Essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm going to create a line of code or function essentially that is going to increase the strength of normal maps on an asset if you wanted to do that. Again, everything we're doing is for tweaking purposes. It's not meant for changing the results drastically. We're then going to go and create 2 component masks. set the one to red and green, and the other one we're gonna kind of change to a blue. We'll add another multiply and another append. And now, again, same process as before, we're just gonna be connecting everything. Connect your base normal to your RG and to your B. Then your RG to your A multiplier. Connect your normal strength to your multiplier B. Then all that's left is connecting your multiplier to your A and your mask B to B. Connect that and we're done. It's pretty easy. So now we want to call that function that we just created. So we're going to open up our content browser and we're going to look for that function, normal strength. And I'm just going to drag it in here and boom. There you can see our base normal and our normal strength. These are the functions, or a function that we've created with essentially 2 calls. Now what we're going to do is, it's pretty simple. We're just going to create another constant, convert that to a parameter, name it normal intensity. Remember, all default values, make them 1, because 1 times 1 is 1, so nothing will change. Essentially, you'll get the same result as whatever you textured in your texturing program of choice. And then you're just going to connect your normal texture map into your base normal here, your new constant parameter that you created, normal intensity, into your normal strength, and then just plug that into your normal. So now all this is going to allow us to do is essentially intensify the values of the normal map that you've created. For this one it'll be a little bit hard to see, but I'll show you another example. This one doesn't have a lot of normal maps in it. Alright, we're going to take that, comment on it, and we're going to call it normal. Simple, easy. Now, last but not least is the ambient occlusion and the roughness and metallic. So for this, it's going to be pretty straightforward. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to do a linear interpolate node again. So the lerp. We're going to create a new constant. And we're going to convert that to a parameter. And we're going to call this AO intensity. You're going to plug this into your alpha, and then you're going to plug this guy into your bravo. But we have a problem. The lerp is essentially saying that, hey, we have a value for B and alpha. Alpha is determined by us, which by the way we set to 1. And B is essentially determined by the texture map. But we don't have anything for A, and A is currently set to 0. So essentially if we ran this code, you would run into an issue because now you're saying it's 0 times 1 times 1. Not going to work. So we have to click on the node and we have to make sure that the constant value is set to 1. Great. All we do is we just plug that into AO and we're done. Create a comment box and just name it AO. And you can see that the AO started applying onto our texture map. Now for roughness and metallic. This is going to be pretty easy, but we're going to go through it. So we're going to take the lerp and we're going to duplicate it again twice. One for roughness and one essentially for the metallic. Create 2 constants and we're going to convert them both to parameters. Now we're going to name this metallic max. And this one metallic min. And we're going to give them again default value of 1, because again 1 times 1 is 1. Ooh, I made a mistake. I plugged in the RGB channel into B. Let's correct that. It's the R channel, the red channel we're plugging into B, because the AO is packed into the red channel. Big mistake. Anyways, All right, now we're gonna take the blue channel, which is metallic. We're gonna plug it into the alpha. We're gonna take the metallic max, plug it into the A, and metallic min into B. Pack that in, comment on it, and we're gonna call this metallic. And then realistically, all we need to do is just take that and plug it into metallic. And you can already see we're starting to get some of that now in our little preview over here. All right, so basically we're just gonna be doing the same thing now for the roughness, as it's the same. So basically we're gonna do the same thing now for the roughness. We're gonna take these guys, we're gonna duplicate it, bring it down, and instead of calling it metallic, we're just gonna call it now roughness max. And roughness min. And we're gonna take our green channel, we're gonna plug it into our alpha, and then same as before, take that and plug it into the roughness. And again, you can see the roughness starts coming in accordance essentially to what I said when I textured this in Substance Painter. We're gonna take that, comment it, and we're gonna call this roughness. Now, it was quite a lot of work. Why did I do all of that? And it's a fair question. I'm gonna show you guys now essentially what was the purpose. So let's say I wasn't happy and I think, hey, listen, this guy needs to be way more shinier. You know, it's too rough, I'm not happy with it. We can change that now. So if we open this guy up, expand it out, and you can see here we have a roughness max and roughness min. So let's enable them, and let's say, you know what, let's actually say that we don't want it rough at all. We want it to be shiny. Now you can make those changes in Unreal Engine instead of taking it back to your texturing program from before, and you can just essentially play around with those values. Now remember, in line with PBR texturing, everything is usually done on a scale of 0 to 1. So if you go over essentially 1, you'll be hard pressed to find any kind of changes. Now the last thing is left to do, and this is more just a little bit of extra information for you guys if you're like me and you're a little OCD on the order of things. I don't like this. This bothers me. And if you're like me and I'm going to be using material instances for the duration of my project, this needs to make more sense. So this is an easy fix. We can just go back here, and let's say we want everything with the texture coordinates. So the U, V, and the UV, we want them to be essentially in a similar group. What we're going to do is we're going to click on the U, and here where it says group, you're going to type in, let's say, text coordinates. And then we change this guy, we name it texture coordinates 2, and this one texture coordinates 2. Great, but we're not done there. If you look on here, this is sort priority. Basically just an Unreal way of saying, hey, what order do you want it being from top to bottom? So we want U to be first, V to be second, and UV to be third. Now if we save this and we open up our material instance, you will see that it's now under a new tree essentially called texture coordinates, UV and UV, and it's not under the global scalar parameter values. I'm going to skip ahead and I'm going to make these changes, and then you'll see the overall layout that I've done. Essentially, we're going to do the same to the textures here. We're going to do the same to each one of these. All right, we're back. So if we open up now the material instance, you can see how I've sorted things out. So I create an AO tree, AO intensity, metallic, normal, roughness, shading, texture coordinates, and this just nicely breaks everything down. It's in the same locations, and I can easily understand exactly what I'm looking at. So you don't have to do this. I just wanted to include it to show you guys how to do it. And then if you're like me, you have a little bit of OCD and you want things to be organized properly, there you go. But that's it, guys. That's all you need to do to create a master material. This essentially now applies for anything. So I'm gonna now show you real quick. Essentially, if I wanted to now, let's say I brought in completely different assets, these two palettes, and I have the textures done already. All I need to do now is find my material instance, duplicate it. Let's call it MI for material instance, underscore palette, and we'll call this one first. I don't know, I'm not creative, sue me. So we're gonna open this guy up. And these are all checked, which is great. Now we're gonna go and we're gonna look. Okay, I want the, I don't know why I created a blue palette, but I did. I want the red palette, so I'm gonna throw that on there. I'm gonna throw the normal on there and the AROM. Great, let's save that. Now all I need to do is chuck this guy on there, bloop, and it's on there. See, no problem, really easy. Again, same process. If I wanted to do the other one, I'll call this second. Throw in the other textures that I've created. Save that. There you go. Easy as that. And then if I wanted to, I can go into the palette. And if I wanted to edit essentially the normal map, which is essentially all these like little wooden markings that I've added for details, right? Let's say I wanted to intensify those. There you go, intensified. It looks ugly now. And there you go, guys. That's about really all there is to it. I hope this helped you out. I wish I found something like this sooner. It would have saved me a lot of time and energy, but this is how, I guess this is how I learn and how we'll get better at making our games. And that's it. That's how you create a master material. I hope you guys found this super useful. I know I would have saved myself a lot of headache if I found something like this a lot sooner. So hopefully this will help a lot of new game developers out there in just being able to start off the right foot, as opposed to where I went like an idiot and just created a material for every single object in my game. Until then, guys, we'll see you in the next devlog or the next tutorial. Cheers.